presentations of the morning, which have to do with the boosters, H2O'Lyon Boosters. This format was initiated last year, and Hervé Piégay will come and introduce what are the boosters. Then there will be three examples, one given by Emmanuel Mignot, one by Jean-François Berger, and one by Hervé. Indeed, this last three-voice presentation will just talk about the boosters. The H2O'Lyon does training, but it has also a scientific policy dimension. Why boosters? Well, this is something that was mentioned or proposed by the institutional committee. Such systems can work as a call for project, but we can decide to build and promote collective strategies, and especially strategies that will make it possible to ensure interdisciplinarity together with the partners. It is a recommendation from the institutional committee, but it is also a recommendation from our international committee made in June 2019. So it was a great idea, and we tried to follow it. It's a top-down strategy, more integrated and interdisciplinary approach to provide collective answers to national and international research call for research in our Horizon Europe, with partners, of course, such as Interreg, Alpine Space, or other systems, but in some cases the ERCs, synergy ERCs, which link up, make it possible to link up several or combine several research teams. We want to organize support projects which could be interesting for the the projects we discussed within the international master. We applied the staircase strategy, which is used by our institutions. We all contribute progressively. We can start with small devices, 5,000 euros, 15,000 euros, to finance masters, seminars, to start creating the blooming or the budding of the interdisciplinarity in project, and then we'll increase progressively or fast on the larger fundings. We could go up to 150,000 euros with the systems we have. But of course, when we put that amount of money, we hope that the collectives will be able to get contracts and develop projects that will be will have a strong international and national impact, and will make it possible to solve international and operational and scientific issues. We took three examples to provide dialogue and exchange. The first example will be presented by Emmanuel Mignot. Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry. Do you mind if I get in front of the laptop? Thank you. So we started from the observations, but about since the year 2000 in Lyon, we've been working on urban floods, and the observations clear. I mean, urban sprawl, extreme events that are to increase with the climate change. And for a while now, the scientific committee has been looking at the risk of urban floods, risk for inhabitants to be to die. Vehicles and urban furniture could cause collision with the rescue teams in flooded cities. And the observation came that pollutions associated with such events were not studied enough in depth. So pollution which may come from a sewer overflow with fecal matter that's been measured in Netherlands, fuel leakages, fuel tanks, so lixiviate in farming zones, and so on and so forth. Based on this observation, we proposed and we debated it is co-constructed between the EUL, the Urban School, and the UAH to Lyon, and EMU took over for the EUL, and therefore we talked and we agreed collectively on two topics, two theses, one in geography and one in hydraulics. They started on the same day. In geography, basically, it is Magali Noël who's working with Emmanuel and Yves Lelay, who has master tutors. What is the problematics of pollution? Why is it not studied? Is it a true issue? What is dysfunctional and what can we do in flooded districts to fight against pollution? And how do population experience this risk of pollution? We had a great experience at the beginning of thesis, summer 21, with the flood in Leven and the fuel smell all over the city. And it's a multi-scale surveys in France and in Quebec. She's doing a 6-month mission in Quebec thanks to this structure. Well, the CPI, which is financing the mission. Now, concerning on the right-hand side, the hydraulics, you see the Clermont-Flagour thesis, which is the target is to understand in terms of hydraulics or fluid mechanics how pollutant can be scattered or dispersed in a street. So what are the hydraulic processes that will govern the dispersion? Are there accumulation zones? And is it possible to digitally simulate such pollution process during urban flood using lab measurements and digital computation? Partners, okay, you see them first part, Sébastien Proust and Nicolas Rivière and myself for the hydraulics, Émile Combi and Yves Lelay for geography. International partners who expressed their interest because it was very attractive to have the two theses in parallel from Leuven, from Quebec, and for Concordia University, actually hosting the one of students. And we realized that when you do a bit of noise, you can have high attractivity, and the networks in Quebec, European colleagues with which we started working, we found that attractive. And we are creating a small community, quite dynamic. I will discuss it afterwards. So how does it work? It's quite innovative. I never heard about two theses in two different disciplines in parallel. We asked the two PhD students to work together, each in his her discipline, but while bearing in mind, keeping a bit of time to communicate and to exchange with the other and to gain from the experience of the other. Maëlys started, she got in touch with more than 100 researchers and experts, and she went to the press and contact with inhabitants on the main risk. And now you go, what is life in often polluted urban zone? Clément has a better understanding on the street network, how pollutants are dispersed or scattered, what are the different sources of pollutant that could be simulated. And he asked Maëlys to add elements to the questionnaire and they see pollutant in their house, at what time, when does it come? And Maëlys says to Clément, but I think this type of event comes often. Can you simulate it? Can you adapt your action to better understand, to see if there is difference between the two types of pollutants? So it seems to be a success story, but in fact, it is highly complicated. And in the last thesis review recently, those two PhD students said, okay, now let's talk about interdisciplinarity, and they challenged us, although we experience, we've been there, done that. We were quite, it was interesting to have feedback from PhD students. So we work in pluridisciplinarity, help us. We face a problem, we don't know how to do it, and we said that we don't know much better. So it was interesting because they really challenged us, those two young PhD students, and therefore we have to think and ponder and seek other partners. Currently, this is the year 2 of the boosters. Thesis was started in November 21, so beginning of second year. I've mentioned all the details early on, with funding from the 3 countries. There is a master internship was financed. Hydraulic and Sustainable Development Group helped us anyway. Hydraulic Environment and Sustainable Development, and then we had the European project because we started I'm steering a co-UD lab, and we have at a symposium in Lyon, 10 European teams, 30 researchers in September to take stock of the situation, and we hope that we'll keep the dynamics of this European network. Go and see the posters, talk with Clément, and if you know how you have to do multidisciplinary science. Oh, so I was always late on my slides. Was I? Yes? No? Well, tell us, because we don't know how to do it. Je peux te laisser finir? Je te laisse finir? J'y vais, pour être tranquille avec le train. Okay.
So we have started a fairly ambitious project for the Saône-Rhône basin. So we want to look at analogues with respect to climate change. So we've looked at organizing windows, studies, partners. We looked at looking for budget co-partnerships, financial partnerships, and how to boost training through research. So after a year, we've got 50 partners, 27 who are from Lyon. So we started with the observation that many institutional teams work on the Paleo-Rhône platforms with little collaboration. So that's why it was important to boost multidisciplinarity and work between different departments, different teams, and from different disciplines, geography, geology, archaeology, bioarchaeology, and all focused in the Rhône area with a systemic approach. So this meant integrating the long-term and talking about processes and impacts, short-term impacts, long-term impacts, in order to look at trends for the last 10 millennia and to look at disconnectiveness, connectedness, and the short-circuiting that we saw in the 20th century. We started with the idea that studying the short term for the Rhône basin has been what we have done for the moment. So the sedimentary archives of rainwater systems are available, but often they're not studied enough. And I'm thinking especially about the updates that you have for preventive archaeology. It's it's full of information, and so I agree with this. I'm working with the different managers in the Rhône corridor. It's important to homogenize multi-parameter practices, share them for different study windows. So it's about spreading practices. We'd like to contribute as well, because there are socio-environmental approaches that are retrospected, and these are very important when it comes to studying the future. We can analyze trajectories, crossroads, we can build scenarios. We can also talk about old analogues in terms of global warming. So it's also possible, with everything that I've just said, to put forward training through research adapted to challenges for the paleo level, focusing with people who work in the field in archaeology, environment, heritage, etc. So the scientific questions focus on 3 points, 3 groups of questions. How have fluvial people, species been developed? What about... I'm sorry, the gentleman is speaking very quickly and he's reading from his paper. How can we assess the impact of anthropization? How have local people responded to the frequency of extreme events? And the second group, how do we look at coupling and the different watercourses in the light of knowledge? And what about landscape structures? Third point, how do you assess the impact of increasing anthropization since the Neolithic period? How can we retrace biotic and abiotic elements? I'm thinking about sedimentary DNA. What about molecular science? What about elementary science, biology, etc.? So the objective is, of course, to develop and to initiate young people into the paleo level of studies for the Rhone area. So I'm now going to show you the different partners. So you can see that our booster covers different CNRS institutes. So they are listed, the INRAE, the INRAP, IFPEN. There are different universities, and Saint-Étienne universities, the Bourgogne University, the Franche-Comté University, Lyon, and also public partners, national, regional partners, heritage institutes, archaeology institutes from different cities. So you can see that the Lyon partners are also listed, the main ones, Uvez, Arques. The gentleman is listing the different Lyon institutes. Now, the contribution of multidisciplinary approaches. Historians, archaeologists, paleoanthropologists have been looking at the transformation of the landscape from a hydrological point of view. The objective of the booster is to look at different approaches, human and social science approaches, to look at the rain systems and to look at retrospective scenarios. We use human sciences, sociomorphology, geomatics, archaeology, history, environmental sciences, geochemistry, mobilization, predictive and retrospective studies. We're trying to work with the partners on the same study sites, small watersheds, pluvial sections, according to an integrated, holistic, systemic approach. We can take the example of paleo pollution. And we have this in our group. We have somebody who focuses on this. We've got different disciplines involved. And then you have the upstream areas where we've worked a lot with Bourgogne universities, with the whole group of disciplines associated. So what about the state of progress? Well, it's been almost a year, not quite. We've looked for collaboration with the archaeology partners. We didn't really start before the summer, so we're a little bit behind our timing. Our booster has three concrete actions. So it carried out three concrete actions in 2020 to boost training through to research. We worked on defining the 5 masters for 2023, and the masters are listed. So we worked with the Bourgogne University and the High Basin of the Saône. It's the east of Dijon, the site that we focused on, with the University of Besançon, into comparisons of 2 fluvial corridors in the Saône and the Rhône. So that's part of the GeoNUM Masters that I will be supervising as part of EVS. And different environmental studies, fluvio studies that are part of this Masters. And then we also focus on the Île-sur-Sorgue area with with a focus on hydro power structures, and that I'm working with people from the Heritage Centre. So these are the masters that have been created. We've also created a field course, a 2-day field course that is coordinated by Hélène Mertion, Jérôme Mignot, and Christian and myself as part of the GeoNUM Masters, and about 40 hours to formalize everything with the M1 and M2 students. So the idea is to build up new data for the booster in the higher part of the basin in the Rhône. And there's a poster on this, and then there's a third point as part of practical workshops in the laboratory. We organized 5 4-hour sessions, and we looked at a multi-proxy study of a sedimentary sample of the Rhône. The idea was for students to describe the sample, to learn about sampling methods, analysis methods, look at physical and chemical properties in order to rebuild evolution in the Rhône corridor. So for the last two slides now, don't worry, I'll manage the last 2 slides. So What about progress in research? In the Rhône Basin, you've got all of the points along the Saône corridor with the Val de Suzan in collaboration with the Bourgogne University. We've got the ENTP team as well. And then there's the INRA and the Besançon University that are involved. That's more ASM in Montpellier, the University of Bordeaux. And you have here an association, a strong association with the local archaeology service that is co-financing, that is providing 8,000 euros. I'm talking with the Zabre, and we need to move forward with the discussions for collaboration. And a last point, so the Rhône Basin, for example, here you have different windows for study. The Digonnière, for example, that's a peatland that was sampled at the beginning of the year to make it possible to trace the paleopollution since antique times. So it's colleagues who are in charge of that. Then there's the Tricastin Plain. We've explored the LIDAR data, and we've carried out geophysical prospecting. This is currently underway, as you can see from the photo. And then there are other approaches for the Sorgue area. On the right-hand side, you've got a city of the medieval city with the place where the samples were taken, and that's what's being studied this year. Just to finish, so partnership, so you can see the partnerships there with the Department of the Isère, the Drôme, the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region, along with the L'Île-sur-la-Sorgue. So there's scientific collaboration with the INRAP so that we can work with the practitioners, with the people who work in the field, and the IFPEN that's taking part in the Rhône Delta thesis, the modeling study. And then there's the Studio IMU, Anthropotraces, coordinated by Lille. The idea is to look at paleo-pollution aspects. Thank you. I'll stop there. So it's about playing musical chairs. So the third example then, I don't know whether I've got enough time. Just a minute. Okay. So the third example, this is a booster plus. In other words, it's focused and supported by IMU and the H2O'Lyon graduate school, like the two boosters that have already been presented, and it's part of what we refer to as OE Monde Durable, so water and urban worlds. So it looks at urban effects on pluvial plains, and we call it CLAW because that gives you an idea of the challenges behind the project. So we use it as an example to see how we can build on multidisciplinary approaches, how we can have more multidisciplinarity in this context. So it really does focus on this stir effect with a first level of support. Then there's a research fund that has made it possible to build the team and to encourage interactions and to move to the project stage. So we are in the project phase now. We've got a CES, a commission called Science of Sustainability, that is supporting projects, that is really part of this multidisciplinary approach that we're trying to develop inside the IMU or the EUR graduate school in Lyon. So this project is based on three hypotheses. So the first is to say that urban development of major beds and alluvial plains varies across the globe in intensity, extent, and underlying causes. So the idea is to say that it's not just what is built, what has been constructed, the houses that lead to this urban development process. There are other vectors that lead to urban development. So there are different forms through, the extraction of gravel that shows that there is urban development. You have the effects on the water table that are not necessarily visible, but do can be seen through the disappearance of wetlands, if you have wetlands upstream of the urban area. The second idea is that recent urban developments represent the major threat to river corridor landscapes. We talked about this already. We talked about the effects of dams, and the idea is to explore whether the urban development process has an impact that has the same level as the building of dams, basically. Now, the third hypothesis, global urban development increases social inequalities, notably in terms of access to care and healthy environmental conditions. There are different avenues to be explored here. This concerns the risk of pollution, it concerns the risk of flooding, and we believe that local solutions can be made more widespread. So the partners of the consortium, so there are 5 French labs. In red, you've got the 3 that belong to H2O'Lyon. We also have our tele-detection colleagues from Montpellier. So they provide structure nationally, not just on the site itself, but there are also the physicists from the ONS in Lyon. We've got an advisory board that is international with colleagues who are going to help us, to create the link with practitioners, who are going to help us to start discussions and have a dialogue about the different subcontinents that are challenged. And then there's the WWF. There's Jeff Opperman's team that is interested in these problems and with whom we have a lot of discussion and we're discussion with a lot of people. So this partnership is very important. It's important to have this partnership link. It does help with projects. We've already started interactions with our partners. Anne-Chine from Denver has already been. We've started to work on the city of Denver. Vikrant Jain, who works in Delhi, he's already been here. And then there's Pan Gao, who's involved in China. He also came to stay with us with the help of, with support in the spring. So there are publications that are currently being drawn up. So multidisciplinarity, you can see the list on the screen. Everything in red is supported by H2O'Lyon. Signal analyses, physics. There are external colleagues who come along and add to the competencies of our skill. So methods and the contributions of this multidisciplinary approach, we've built 4 work packages that are systems. They're like a Russian doll. So you start very broad with 300 sites with a worldwide geography, and little by little you boil things down to 50 sites where you can develop a remote detection that's a little bit more detailed, and then we'll go down to 5 to 10 sites. From a social science point of view, we will have field investments that will be even bigger. The idea is to shed light on a certain number of hot topics, hot points that need to be talked about, that need to be debated, that may be emblematic for worldwide discussions. And work package 4, that's all about informing and monitoring. And, this involves a lot of focus on making things visible, making problems visible, relating to alluvial plains, using the web, for example, so that through webinars we can create a kind of dynamic movement at world scale in terms of the scientific debate and the operational debate about these different challenges. So what about progress? Well, we've finished the boost, we've launched the rocket, and now we're going to move on to the project, which will be started on the 1st of January 2023. So there's a workshop that's going to be participatory. It's going to be open this afternoon. So if you want to continue to dialogue about these different questions, Barbara Belletti will be moderating the workshop. So she was very much involved in setting up the project, and so she'll be able to tell you more and launch the discussion. So we've taken 3 examples. A lot of work was carried out in terms of the steering committee to know what we should be boosting, and we identified geoarchaeology. This was a starting discipline. Water and cities. This was another starting point that we talked about. It's one of the strong elements of Lyon Saint-Étienne. And with IMU, we set up a meta studio on water and the urban world. And there's a young officer who's joined the team, Sarah. I haven't been told to stop yet, so I'm just going to keep going. So Sarah will be in charge of moderating the meta studio in order to promote research together with the operationals, and also to support the different projects and to continue with all of that. And then we have another booster focusing on contaminants that we're trying to which we're trying to add more of a disciplinary approach. It's Marina who's in charge of that, and she will be joining us probably next year. This week she wasn't available. So if there are other initiatives, we can talk about them in the steering committee. There was a focus on the confluence as a theme. It's an important theme from a multidisciplinary point of view, and it's also another entrance point or starting point, if you like. Thank you for listening. So we have time perhaps for 1 or 2 questions. We don't have too much time, though, because I think everybody's hungry. Would somebody like to act or ask a question? Would somebody like to react, or ask a question?
Impressive list of different scientific disciplines that you are looking at in these booster projects, especially the Rhone study. What I'm sitting here missing is a mentioning of biogeochemistry, explaining then the links between the explanatory and response parameters, moving from multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary research. Do you have any comments on, because I haven't heard the sort of biogeochemistry once today, and I'm sort of puzzled by it, because it's a very central discipline to understand the links and the mechanistic sort of couplings between what is happening.
Sur la biochimie, notamment.
Biochemistry, biogeochemistry. Well, biogeochemistry, we don't really have anybody who is competent in our skill for developing that kind of aspect. We focus on elementary chemistry to look at minerals and metals, and classic quantitative chemistry for the soil. But we do have potential partnerships for working on the search for molecules in sedimentary archives, for example. Coprostanol is a marker of anthroponization. Miliacin is another that tells us more about former practices. But yes, we need to boost this area. These are costly analyses.
On a des spécialistes du domaine.
So we have specialists from the area who are very much invested in a certain number of themes. So Piégay is being timid and shy, but he can say something about that. Gilles is involved as well. He's involved on NR Globe. But behind ecology, you have Sylvain Dolidec, who works on macroinvertebrate. There's Gilles working on biochemical processes, and Bernard Kaufmann is working on urban aspects. Just a few words. We were talking about boosters and confluences. This is a subject that will really focus on biochemistry, because beyond the purely hydraulic aspects and geomorphological aspects, there's a biogenerational aspect involved in these confluences. And so that's the idea of the booster. We want to combine hydraulic studies and biochemical studies so that we can see the effects of these confluences, whether we're talking about the different qualities of water, different hydrologies, and then you've got the biochemical results. So this is fairly original, I think, because up until now, from a biological point of view, we haven't really looked at these confluences because they're complex zones. But when you have people from the hydraulics side of life, we will really be able to make the most of our collaboration. So we do have some skills, though. Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you.